Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFurio. I'm your host for the show. And if you are interested in staying up to date with all of the episodes we put out on the show and really want to support the show too, because it helps with the ranking of Keys to the Shop, then subscription is the best way to do that, on top of 5-star ratings and reviews and that kind of thing, which thank you, by the way, for all of you all who do that. Subscription over on YouTube or on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Just subscribe to the show, and that will do a world of good for the show, but also you'll stay up to date with all the episodes and content that we put out. And it's going to win-win. It's a win-win thing. So thanks, everybody. Now, one thing that's coming up here really shortly is the next season of the Key Holder Coaching Groups. These are coaching groups that I started a little bit ago, actually last year, in the beginning of last year. We're on our third. Actually, it was 2023. So it's longer than that. And it feels like we've done them for forever, really. The fourth season of this service, well, it's a group, is happening in March. So the Keyholder Coaching Group is a mastermind group of coffee shop owners that I am facilitating under the name of Keyholder Coaching Groups for 5 or 6 coffee shop owners who have 2 years or more experience running their businesses, are gathered together for accountability, for support, encouragement, insights, and driving one another on to success and thriving in their coffee shops. We've seen so many great conversations and positive changes in people's lives and in their businesses. So excited about this. So if you're interested in being a member of this upcoming group being launched in March, probably a little bit towards the end of March, then email Chris at keystotheshop.com. And you'll just we'll figure out how to get on the phone or on the Zoom call. You and I will talk. We'll send you an application to be considered for membership in this group. It's really a huge value for coffee shop owners who are largely isolated. I mean, the business of being an owner is difficult. There's just no other way to put it. It is difficult because you're making all these decisions. You're making these decisions that a lot of people don't really appreciate the gravity of. And there's a lot of second, third, and fourth guessing that happens. So outside perspectives from people that are living the same kind of life that you are, but have the ability to speak into your situation, and then you have the ability to speak into their situation. This is where the magic happens. It's community, basically. So Keyholder Coaching Groups happening soon. Email Chris at keystotheshop.com. Now, today's episode is going to be brought to you by our friends at arto.com, Arto Brick on Instagram. They are purveyors of and makers of wonderful stonework, hard surfaces, tiles. Go there and see for yourself. But also, you have our friends at the Pacific Barista Series at pacificfoodservice.com, where you can learn more about them. Plant-based beverages, top-notch. We're going to talk about both of those folks in the middle of our episode today, a little bit later. But right now, I want to get to the intro for our very special guest, someone whose perspective on coffee and people is, I feel like there's a resonance with my own, in that we do kind of similar things. He has a podcast about coffee people, and he's done far more than just that, of course, as you're going to learn in this episode. But the focus on the people part is why I wanted to have today's guest on the show. We're talking with Ryan Woldt, who is the host, creator of the Coffee People podcast. I was actually a guest on Ryan's podcast recently. I'll link to that in the show notes. But today we get to interview Ryan. And so a little bit about Ryan. Ryan Woldt is a Wisconsin-born author and entrepreneur. He is a creative maker, and he's currently the producer and host of the Coffee People podcast and the Coffee Smarter podcast. And he's a brand ambassador for Roastar Incorporated, which is a coffee packaging company. And by the way, Roastar is an amazing company. So I'm glad to hear that Ryan is a ambassador for that brand. So Ryan describes himself, he told me, as a creative raccoon, which means he's always reaching for the next shiny creative project to add to his current collection. He grew up in a family restaurant. He has continued to keep a foot in the door of hospitality, the hospitality space, for more than 3 decades. And of course, this includes coffee, as you'll find out in our conversation. So his passion for collaboration overlaps with his desire to make things. And obviously, he's in the right business here, because collaboration and making and being a creative is kind of what coffee is really good at. He's particularly drawn to hospitality in the hospitality space. And he just recently launched a collaboration celebrating the language of the Midwest called Yeah, No, Yeah Coffee with a Minneapolis based roaster and recent guest on the show, Relative Coffee Company, our friend Bryant Banker Scannell. So today, in this conversation with Ryan, we're going to talk all about his evolution as a creative, as a hospitality professional, and a hospitality ethos purveyor, I would say. Somebody who is bringing people together to showcase their stories on a stage of a podcast. And he's I think got over 300 episodes now of the Coffee People podcast. And his style of questions and deep conversation really draws out the human stories that connect us all in coffee. And that's why we titled today's episode The Wonderful World of Coffee People, because this is the kind of thing that you can only really enjoy if you take the time to connect over coffee with people. And each person who occupies our time and attention, the depth of that person is unveiled through that conversation, through exploring. And it really does a world of good for the soul to have that kind of a demonstration of depth of humanity in our industry, thanks to people like Ryan and his podcast. So I really wanted to talk to Ryan today. I think this is a super encouraging episode. So sit back, get a cup of coffee, get ready to be connected to these stories and learn more about Ryan's story and journey through hospitality in this episode. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with Ryan Woldt. Well, hey, Ryan, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How's it going today?
Hey, Chris. I'm doing all right. I am tucked away in my little closet studio. Just, I've been here since last week waiting for this chat with you.
Just in the closet studio?
I was so excited. I just got in here, never left.
It must be very comfortable. All the meals underneath the door.
Yeah, very cozy.
You got all your clothes there. Well, I'm grateful to have you on the show, and I was grateful to be a guest on your show, the Coffee People podcast, and just the conversational nature of what we do in coffee is pretty apparent to anybody working in coffee. It's like over the counter conversations or team meetings and customers having conversations. So it just is fitting that we have these platforms to present the same thing for each other as coffee people. So it was one of those things where, as I was being interviewed by you, and it was really the first time that we had met face to face, or as it were, digitally. I'm struck by just kind of a deeper take on how we perceive people and a vocation. And I have to think that that's something that you've had for a long time, especially considering you've got some writing as a writer, a writing career. And I would say
Career
as a
is a
career,
strong term, Chris.
I knew you were going to say that, but to me, it feels like a career. But what is the way you view the world that makes you want to dig deeper into the story of people and what they do?
Cynicism, probably,
Oh
to
wow.
start with. Searching for hope, I think. I'm not sure. I think, I spent a lifetime in hospitality since I was a small kid. I grew up in it. And every day meeting new people, talking to new people. not realizing that most people don't meet 100 new people every day when I was a little kid. And then doing that again as an adult as I tried to escape that world and say, no, now it's time to get a real job, a real career, and looking at other things. And eventually coming back to realizing this is the thing in my life that has value. And I've been collecting these stories year after year after year, whether it's behind the bar or it's, in management or whatever it is. And then thinking, man, I should have been paying more attention because all of these people brought something to my life. And I had found at some point I was on autopilot. You get used to the smile, how are things going, and you're always saying things are going great. You're always giving that the perspective of the operator. And what I realized at some point was I was taking those stories home, and the little bits and pieces that stuck out to me were motivating me to try new things and do new things. And then with the show that I have now, Coffee People Podcast and then Coffee Smarter Podcast, it was really an extension of a year that I spent learning about coffee. And what I took away from that is sometimes coffee tastes like blueberries. And then what I really loved about it wasn't necessarily the brewing of the coffee or the learning about the roasting. It was the community of people that came into that shop, some new, some day after day, and getting to be part of their lives in a way that I used to do in the bar business, but almost on a deeper connection because they would sit there and we would chat about their life. They would come in the morning when they were fresh from the day, and I would get to see these people go off into the world and do something either mundane or exciting or challenging. And I would be able to think about that in terms of, can I do that too? And what is the thing that I want to do that with? Which is always a challenge for me because I consider, I've used the term creative raccoon to describe myself. I may have used that with you off camera at some point. But I start doing something and then I see something fun and exciting over here and I think, oh, I want to do that too. But I don't want to let go of the first thing. And so I'm always fighting bandwidth issues in my life. And this thing that is stuck has been the listening to other people's stories or providing them the opportunity to tell them when maybe there isn't a lot of focus on a coffee shop operator or an espresso muralist or whatever it might be connected to coffee.
That's really interesting how it was born from a, I call it sleep. We have an episode called The Sleepwalking Barista because it was me for years of
Mm-hmm.
not, I don't know where I was. It was like some kind of black site, CIA black site. And I just woke up and then
Sure.
years later, you do feel that there was a kind of frittering away of time that now you're trying to make up for, I suppose. But it's, do you feel that coffee lends itself to being able to more closely identify those things from people? Like you in the bar business, I'm sure you heard stories and there was opportunity to really be affected by or affect others. Um, but is coffee a little bit more set up to give that kind of a return to us who work in it?
I think coffee offers more of a back and forth opportunity than maybe the bar business did. Not that it wasn't there with people that I got to know pretty well or with regulars or whatever it might be. But I think with coffee, the idea of sitting down and having a conversation over a cup of coffee is something that pretty much anyone who drinks coffee identifies with. It's also a time that if you're alone, or at least for me, I use it to kind of reset my focus for the day or whatever it might be, or to kind of get myself. It's this consistently. It's one of the few consistent things in my life is that I wake up and I make a cup of coffee, whatever method I use to make it or brew it or wherever I have it. And so it's a brief moment of reset. And when I'm sitting with someone else and talking to them over a cup of coffee, it feels like a natural give and take as opposed to being a bartender where I'm just taking. Like they're giving to me, their story, and my job is to smile and nod and occasionally agree or point to the sign that says we don't do politics here.
Oh, nice, nice. Yeah, there's some similarities between baristas and bar work in the limitations of the personal versus professional line that sometimes is drawn, but then the excited nature of the average, caffeine person, they're it's different than alcohol. It's lit differently usually in a coffee shop. It's arranged as a way of pushing you further into your life maybe than to have you escape your life.
I think it's growing into each other, though. I think that coffee shops, as we've gone through specialty from just the kind of the fast paced, second wave, here's a bunch of options and flavors, into this experience based coffee shop. I find that my experience going to a bar or a coffee shop is fairly similar. Now, I'm a little bit different in that caffeine doesn't really impact me uh,
Oh,
that much. And so I never drink coffee just to get a quick caffeine buzz in the morning. It's more just a way for me to, as I mentioned, reset, but also just gives me some consistency, which I need. As any entrepreneur needs when you're kind of doing your own thing and doing different things every day. My first coffee shop experience was in a bar like atmosphere.
oh,
Star
okay.
Lounge in Chicago was the first cup of coffee I ever drank, which was a bar that had been converted into a coffee shop, and I think was adults only. I think it was still 21 plus, even though it was just coffee shop.
Wow.
I could be mistaken there. Someone can correct us on the internet. But then even after that, my first kind of regular everyday going to the coffee shop was an Intelligentsia in Pasadena, which doubled as a wine bar. And so you could sit there all morning and work on your computer or talk or whatever you were going to do and have a cup of coffee. And then 3 o'clock would roll around and you could have a glass of wine or a beer or whatever you were going to have. And I think it was less about what we were drinking and more about the fact that there was a community of people that felt comfortable here, whatever the experience was. And we live in one of the greatest times ever to be a coffee person because whatever experience you're looking for, you can find it in any mid-sized town across America, which is amazing.
It is amazing. I remember in the days of the early 2000s thinking where will coffee go in the countryside and the suburban areas? It was really just the city centers, and we all had different gurus and destinations that we had earmarked. But now it's, yeah, these youngsters just don't know how good they have it, I suppose.
Oh, I feel
Uh,
that way about most things.
yeah, I think your first year as a professional in coffee. I'm curious about that because, as an appreciator of people from your bar experience in hospitality, but then going into the coffee industry, you mentioned blueberries, which is good. Got that out of the way. Uh, we got the
First week.
blueberry. Right, right. That feels like a old psychedelic album, like the
Mhm.
Blueberry Epiphany or something. But the idea of you then continuing in coffee, I'm curious what kind of grabbed you and said, this is the place where you're not just going to exist, you're going to thrive, you're going to stay in this, you're going to learn roasting, you're going to be a coffee professional. What was that moment for you?
Well, we should clarify that even though I know how to roast, I am not a roaster. I am someone who sees that as a skill set the same way I saw any sort of science growing up and said, well, that looks nice over there. And we're going to, learn the basics, but we're going to leave it for the professionals. For me, I had an opportunity 8 years ago or so, 9 years ago, to open up a bar of my own. And I had this idea that I wanted it to be a coffee and beer, craft beer themed bar. And that hadn't really happened yet. It wasn't really out there as like a concept. And we were working towards that. I had financing. I was ready to go. I was 24 hours away from signing the lease. And I backed out of the deal because, as much as I understood the beer and the bar side of things, I did not understand the coffee side. Maybe longer than that now. I think time has been flying by faster than I realized. And it bothered me. it really bothered me that I backed out of the deal. I didn't trust that I could find someone else to do that side of the business because I didn't know what I was looking for. I didn't understand what made one coffee better than another. And as that kind of was weighing away on me because I just don't like not doing things that are right there for me. A friend of mine was opening a coffee shop 2 or 3 blocks away from the restaurant that I was running. And I said, "Hey, I know you as, someone who we ride bicycles together sometimes, and I've seen you at the coffee shop you work at. How much would you charge me just to teach me something about coffee, like a couple hours or whatever it might be? Because it really bothered me. I didn't know this, and I just would like to know more about it." Chris O'Brien, Coffee Cycle Roasting in San Diego, is still a close friend.
Nice.
And Chris said, I've never opened a full cafe before. I've never, I can make the coffee and I can serve it and I can do all that, but I haven't done all this other stuff, the marketing, the layout, the having an employee. I've never had an employee before. Why don't we make a trade? You come here 1 hour a week, Friday mornings, you come on in for an hour or two. I'll teach you coffee on the job, and then I'll learn how to be a boss at the same time. And then if I have
Huh.
questions about the business side, I can ask you. And I said, man, that sounds great because I didn't want to pay you anyways because I didn't have a lot of money. And so that was our deal. I was going to come in every, either Thursday or Friday for an hour or two in the morning before I went to my restaurant to run the restaurant. And we hadn't opened yet. So we were there for a couple weeks kind of practicing and training. And then, we opened the doors and it was crazy. And I was essentially register and pour overs is what I had learned. I wasn't allowed to touch the espresso machine yet. And it was great. It was just a lot of fun for an hour or 2 a week, but that clearly wasn't going to last. And all of a sudden I realized I'm working in this cafe 4 or 5 days a week for 3 or 4 or 5 hours, and then also running this restaurant from 10 to midnight or whatever, 10 to nighttime. And it was an overwhelming experience where I would catch a train in the morning, ride my bike into work from the train station, work in the cafe, learning and learning and learning every day, just a crash course on everything about specialty coffee. I didn't know that Chris is kind of a world class coffee person, like who
Hmm.
knows what he's doing and can walk into competitions and be recognized and can uh, gains respect from people that I now know are legends in the industry. So he was really, you know, putting the screws to me, so to speak, as far as coffee knowledge. And at the same time, the coffee shop went from just me and him and maybe 5 customers a day to getting busier and busier and busier. And about a year into it, I said, Chris, I can't keep this up. Being a barista is so much harder for so much less money than I've ever done in hospitality as a bartender or in that side of things where I'm running a team of 35 employees and then coming here and just being the lowest of the low grunt on the totem pole, which was great. It was exactly what I was looking for, but I'm also not learning as much anymore because we're too busy. I'm mostly just here to serve coffee, and that's
Yeah.
great, but it's also not what I'm hoping to get out of this. Let's move forward. And so we hired some employees and Chris started training them, and I phased out at that point, but stayed involved on the, one supporting the coffee shop, but came back to help with marketing and planning events and social media and that stuff. So stayed connected to that particular coffee shop and became part of that community. That runs us right into I had a poisoning incident at my job and I ended up
Oh.
in the hospital. I got some very nasty beer line cleaner. If anyone out there's, understands the concept of cleaning beer lines, tap lines,
Yeah.
there's this really concentrated, nasty stuff. And I got some on my hands and got into my mouth. I actually picked something up. I was being foolish. Just doing the thing I told my employees not to do. And before I would ride to the train station every day, I'd have a little piece of chocolate to kind of get me motivated. That day I hadn't washed my hands and there was a little bit of that concentrate on my fingers. And just that tiny little bit that transferred to the chocolate and then into my mouth was enough to put me on the ground. And thankfully, my boss was coming in as I was trying to leave, and she found me on the ground and took me to the hospital.
No way.
And
Like literally on
so,
the ground.
yep, I couldn't breathe. I was really struggling to catch my breath, and spent the night in the hospital. And I learned a lot about the dangers of poisoning, namely that there's no medicine for it. There's no like solution. They just wait until something goes wrong and then they treat that. And they let me know at the emergency room, how foolish I was, and I didn't disagree, and I still don't. Actually, I took some pictures that night and I shared them with some friends in the beer industry who use them in their safety presentations now of me, giving the thumbs up with like the oxygen masks on and that sort of thing.
Always the thumbs up.
But that was a turning point for me. And one, it was very stressful. It was also tough on my health, and I stepped away from that industry a few months later, and in part just to take a break and reset, which I did, and spend some time thinking about what is it that I want out of my life. This is a very eye opening experience. Is this what I'm happy doing? And
Hmm.
while I was making that decision, I had found a new job that was going to start on March 12th of 2020. And March 12th of 2020 is the day that they shut down California. And I think March 15th is anywhere else that was getting shut down. And so I was at home. And the job I had planned on starting wasn't going to be starting. It was in a totally different industry. And I needed something to do. And the thing that I was missing, that everyone was missing, was the community part of coffee shops. You didn't realize how much that mattered. You didn't realize how much it mattered to go get groceries and say hello to the person at the register, or, whatever it was in those early days. And even myself, I'm an introverted extrovert. I turn it on when I have to, and I like to be alone and quiet when I don't. I was really missing that. And in particular, thinking a lot about those first months that I spent working at Coffee Cycle at the coffee shop, and just the conversations that would come out of giving someone a cup of coffee and asking about their day, or asking Chris, like, hey, why do we do this? Why do we, when you pull the espresso lever down, what are you looking at over here on the clock? And then him walking me through the process of timing a shot, and, all those little things that every day it felt like a exciting, new experience and motivating. And so I thought, well, what's really popular is podcasts. I listen to hours of them a day. It's like I could probably do that. And you know what? It'd be a nice couple weeks project for me to do, and then I'll move on. And I just called around San Diego area and all the coffee shops that I loved to go to, and asked them, would you talk to me for a little bit on this podcast so I can learn about what you do? And they all said yes. I mean, there was like, I don't think anyone was looking for any reason not to do things at that point, and they
Yeah,
weren't doing
so cool.
anything. So I recorded 10 interviews, which was just a lot of fun. And I should caveat, I was already writing a beverage column for a local newspaper. And so I
Oh,
had some experience in interviewing people. It was primarily an interview based column with local brewers. And I just was turning my attention to coffee, but in an audio format. But I didn't have any background, It certainly wasn't the keys to the shop quality, I can tell you that. Uh, it was me recording Google Meet interviews on my phone and then downloading it from my phone onto the computer and then trying to upload it. And at the end of that first season, I just thought, God, I'm so inspired by all these people who, coffee, yes, but also people who saw something they loved and pursued it. And they're very, 10 interviews, I thought they all have the same story. They fell in love with coffee, they opened a coffee shop, so on. But it was so
yeah.
wildly different. Their motivations day to day were different. And it's like, this is something I like to do. I wonder if I could keep doing it. How could I justify continuing to do this without looking for, a real job? And so I called up those first 10 interviews and I said, hey, would you give me a few bucks, every month so I could buy a microphone? So I could buy a better computer, so I could, learn this software.
Yeah.
And they all just said yes. And that's where it all started. And from there came the newsletter and a second show and then a third show. And then we went back down to two, and it just kept going and going. And now, what year is it? 2025. We're going into our fifth year, four
Nice.
plus. It's still a little bit of that. Every week I get to talk to somebody new and I hear this whole new story about how they got from point A to B. And I'm always, I always come away going, man, like everyone just has this path through life. And how lucky am I that I get to share it with other people?
You know, the industry that, hospitality in general is about, in some fashion, being behind the scenes, even though you're up front, even though you're greeting people, you're front of house, even if you're front of house. It's still isolating. And, I'm so glad you started this, especially during the pandemic, because people were just missing that, of course. But I feel like people in coffee are wanting to tell their story, or maybe don't even think that they have a story until somebody like you comes along and asks them very intentional and good questions about their life. And they're like, oh, well, no one's ever really taken that much of an interest in what I think or what I was feeling at this time. And so when you're interviewing these people, I imagine it's a lot like the the revelations that you were having about coffee when you were first learning about coffee. Now it's almost like you're learning about people the same way, and they're giving to you something that you didn't think the people could give to you. Maybe you did, but you hear coffee is really great, and then you taste that first really great coffee, and it's like, wow. And then you have this story, and you're like, that was a really good story. Was it? Did it feel like that for you?
I think what it felt like for me was this dopamine hit. I mean, I'm a dealer. That's all I am. Is I'm taking in these great motivational, inspirational stories and then giving them back out to the people. And I get to feel good when they tell me, and I get to feel good when I give them out and someone says they appreciate it. That being said, I think it just reminded me that, and I stress that I really do. My dream in life is to move on to 100 acres in the woods and just be, by myself with my wife and the dog. But the value that I find in connecting with people over coffee or a beer or whiskey or whatever it might be, as much as I find an incredible value in the beverage itself, the thing that makes it really special is, how naturally I'm able to connect with people. I don't want to say that I don't do that normally. I think I was trained to do it from birth in the restaurant, but it's the one of the few times where the drinking of a cup of coffee slows me down enough to not be on that autopilot. It gives me the opportunity to take a sip and consider what somebody's saying, or to stop just waiting for my turn to talk,
Yeah.
which is something we all sort of fall into. And now, over the last 10 years, social media has taught us is the way to exist. We're all, as much as I have maybe turned a nose up at it, like technically I'm an influencer with the show. That's like the term I've been told, and I hurt real bad when I first heard it. But that's true. We kind of have taught it. We've created this industry where we're talking out at the world, but there's not necessarily that immediate response, unless you have like a really good social media, which I do not. But sitting and having a cup of coffee, whether I go to the coffee shop by myself or I go with someone else or I meet somebody there, it gives this really intentional back and forth. And to me, that if the show went away, that doesn't go away. If what I'm doing goes away or I choose to do something else, that will always be there as, for me, a way to connect with other people. And
Yeah.
that's something that I think I need in my life, because otherwise I would just stay home and read books and, watch good movies and go for hikes in the woods alone.
You're enjoying in those things. I was thinking about you, escaping to the wilderness and the grandeur of nature. And I, I feel like I've said the same kind of a thing. And, you know, sometimes it's about identifying with that particular form of beauty and the fact that you're providing that panorama, that same kind of 100 acres for somebody else, I think is really interesting after all
Sure.
these years of doing it.
What I think is amazing to me is I start with kind of a template of questions to ask people. And then as I start looking into them, there's this balance of learning enough that I can ask questions that have value and that are specific and will help them tease out their story if they aren't used to telling it, but without me learning too much, so that when we have the conversation, I'm just waiting for them to finish so I can ask another question. And I think you do this really well. I've listened to a bunch of your shows, and even right now with me, I can tell that you're taking what I'm saying, and then whatever you're going to ask me next is in somewhat predicated on that. You're not just going down a list. And I think to me that has been the most valuable thing, and really forced me to be engaged, because if I have this list and I just ask you A, B, C, D, those questions aren't very interesting. You know, like,
Yeah.
it, great, I know what your favorite thing is, or I know how you got your start or whatever. But if you say something and then I can take that in and respond and say, oh, well, how did that make you feel in relation to this other thing you said before?
Mm-hmm.
Now you've gone off book, and now people have the chance to really open up and maybe to their own surprise tap into something they didn't realize was there, or make them realize something about their motivation they didn't know, or share something they hadn't shared before. And those to me are the shows that I walk away from and just feel really excited, really motivated to get that out there right away, or to work on it and do the parts of this project, you know, that I don't like, the editing or
Yeah.
the background stuff, that is not quite as fun. And you know, a great example would be I was talking a few years ago to a woman named Taylor Fields, who left a Fortune 500 job to start a coffee shop, you know, to start a coffee roaster. And in that conversation, she mentioned how she had moved across the country with her partner. And that led us to this whole conversation of, well, how did, you know, that's a big leap for any entrepreneur, is your partner has to be supportive and on board. How did that go? So we were able to get into this whole conversation about the challenges for other people that our choices as entrepreneurs create, and how finding balance in your personal life is, it leads right back into your day-to-day work. And if you don't have one or the other, eventually, you know, it's going to cause a problem somewhere for you, and
Yeah.
you're going to have to make a choice.
Hmm.
And those are the conversations. Those are the reasons why this show has lasted as long as it has, because I just get excited to hear those new stories, and it's almost like treasure hunting. You know, every
Yeah.
time is this new exciting adventure, even if some of the themes are the same.
Hey, everybody, it's Chris, and we'll get right back to our conversation with our friend Ryan Woldt. But right now, I wanted to mention something about our sponsors, starting with this company, Arto, at arto.com, Arto Brick on Instagram. So, especially if you want to get connected with this family run company founded by Arto and now run by his two sons, Armin and Vod, in Los Angeles. They make tile and their stonework by hand in LA to this day, and they are all about helping us, people in hospitality spaces, create unique spaces through tile work, stonework, hard surfaces. I can't emphasize enough how far the depth of character of the physical space goes for how people enjoy their coffee. And so, if you're into that idea of the intentional space and artistic expression and creating something unique, go check them out. Arto.com. Better yet, I think that you can reach out to them on Instagram. That's the best way. Follow them at ArtoBrick. Reach out to Armin on direct messenger. Say that Chris DeFurio at Keys to the Shop sent me. Hey, what can we do with bricks and tile? Let's talk about coffee or something, you know. Just talk to Armin over at ArtoBrick, at ArtoBrick on Instagram. Now, we're also sponsored today by our friends at the Barista Series from Pacific. Now, they have been supporting coffee professionals for quite a long time. Pacific has been somewhat of a ubiquitous presence because of that. Competitions, you'll see them, actually physically see the people that work at these companies, there and cheering on baristas, supporting, doing all sorts of charitable events. Pacific is a wonderful company, but talking about what they offer in their product of the Barista series, it stands up to the heat from steaming, produces great texture, and also has great flavor balance for coffee drinks. Plant based beverages are not going to stop in their popularity. You want something that actually performs well, then I think you need to be looking at the Barista series from Pacific. Check them out over at pacificfoodservice.com. Now, back to our episode with our friend Ryan Woldt. We in our family have gone to every year now, since my son is old enough to appreciate gems and minerals and geodes and things like that. Geodes are kind of what comes to mind when you're thinking about, here's a person, and this person has a story, but on the outside, they're a person. I mean, you've seen people, I've seen people, but there's a faith in the idea that inside of that, there is something that is not viewable to the average person. You have to kind of break it open a little bit, but it's been forming for quite a long time. And you saying, this going off book and being genuinely curious, it takes a lot of security. First of all, for you in that position as a questioner or a facilitator of conversation to allow it to go quote unquote off the rails or something. Um, and it almost feels like that's what we do sometimes this is kind of a practical thing, but when we're interviewing people in a cafe, I feel like sometimes we just want the questions have to be like so engineered, but we don't want to go off book, but we really want to get to know these people, and also communicates something of our own genuineness to them, that we've asked them a question that they've never been asked before, because they're kind of prepared. A person that is being interviewed, they're prepared for you to ask the boilerplate questions, and for them to confirm, or I confirm that this boss is totally like a boss, the average boss. But when you get all sincere and original, and you truly back up this notion that we love people, which a lot of coffee shops do say, then that really signals that something is different. And so I think a lot of people could learn from your example to say, I want to uncover those things about that story, and facilitate their sharing, because they do have something beautiful to share, even though on the surface it may just be another person at first.
At the beginning, I mentioned cynicism as one of the motivators for the show, and I'd bring that back around to as an example here, because that first season of this show for me, of me doing a podcast, it was very uplifting at a time when I really was struggling, both with my own personal motivation and COVID, and my frustration maybe with some of my community that saw things differently than me. And we can all, we all have our own perspectives on how all of that beginning time went. I was really struggling, and the show really, these interviews gave me the opportunity to find goodness. And cynicism kind of drives me in the sense that, as my expectation for people has been lessened over the years, in part because we live in a society that reinforces the negative things. They reinforce, social media reinforces things that aren't great, or they go, can you believe this? Oh my goodness. And
Mm-hmm.
I think after so many decades now in hospitality, you've seen kind of the best and the worst of people at different points in the day and the year
Yeah.
in their life. And so nothing truly really surprises me in that world, at least. And this show, I almost never leave. In 300 and some shows, I should do it. I should actually count. I'm and figure out the exact number, but I almost never leave an episode feeling like, oh, what an asshole. I mean, even if I might have gone into it going, oh, this person, I don't know. You start the second you go past that first layer, that first impression, that first walking down the street and you see someone and you make an instinctive judgment because you've learned how to do that since you were a kid. You know, the second I do that for this show, I'm almost immediately rewarded with this reminder of how complex life is and how complex every interaction is, and how at its core, for as complex as everything is, all we're looking for is the opportunity to share a piece of ourselves with someone else, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
feel like we're being seen. And, that's what you're doing for me today. And that's what I hope to do for other people, on my show at some point. And eventually, as the rules of Highlander apply, we'll come up in battle against each other and hopefully, shake hands before.
I'm so glad you referenced that. I've not
A
thought
nice
about that in so long.
late 80s, early 90s reference there for anyone.
Beautiful. My Gen Xer heart is fluttering. I think the thing that I'm thinking about right now is that moment where you dig into that interview. Where, by the way, cynicism is not just perspective on others; it's also I know myself well enough to know
Mm-hmm.
that there are there's peaks and valleys. Let's put it nicely, I guess. But when you're rewarded with that positive feedback from whether it's an inspired time of questioning, like I'm totally going to uncover something great, or you may be skeptical, like I don't know, are we? And it does happen. What usually is that thing for your Coffee People podcast that unites the positivity? What's kind of like a through line of positivity that you've seen from these interviews that you could connect a bulk of these people to?
I think the through line is that they're excited to share something that they're passionate about with everyone else because they know what it's done for them. They know what their passion for brewing a perfect cup of coffee has done for them in their life, and they want everyone to experience that in some way,
Yeah.
whatever way might be possible for them. And we interview a lot of different people on our show, a lot of different categories in the industry. I always kind of say the show is really, coffee is just the wrapper. And it's really a show about motivation and entrepreneurship. And so we've interviewed roasters and baristas and farmers, sure, but we also have interviewed artists and tech entrepreneurs and, software engineers and anyone who's somehow connected, even ancillarily, to the industry and how that works. The Smithsonian came on the show because they have a bird friendly coffee program, right? I mean, those are things that you just don't think about when you think, oh, coffee industry right away. And in every case, we start with, we're having a cup of coffee and chatting, and then they get to share this thing that excites them
Mm.
in some way or has challenged them and they've come through on the other side. And then I get excited and I get to share that with someone else. And then we always close our show out with asking them what they drink when they go to a coffee shop. And I hate to stereotype, but if I'm talking to a coffee roaster, 99% of the time it's going to be a black coffee drip with no frills. In any other industry, any other professional might go a different direction. But we always end that way, and I think for me it's a way of bringing the show back around to the coffee side of things and saying, hey, all of this stuff exists because we all love this one thing. How crazy is that? And being aware for myself that there's a million other things that people could find that value in, whether it's coffee or it's gaming or it's hiking or whatever your thing is. There's going to be a community there for you, and if you are willing to look for it or willing to take a few minutes to engage with the people in it, you'll probably be rewarded in ways you just never expected.
In some ways, it feels like one of the best things that could happen as a result of your show is that other people are inspired to go off autopilot. And in some ways, I also think our industry has a lot of tips, tricks, hacks, and steps to get to a place without having to do too much or think too much, which feels like it's the opposite of that in some ways. What's I don't say maybe lightly the balance of that, but how does an industry or at least a community of professionals in coffee become more awake and hand on the wheel rather than autopilot.
I think it depends on the motivation of the person. Specifically, are they looking for an opportunity to make a living, or are they looking to create a passion that becomes a living? It depends on what your focus is. For me, I started this because I just wanted to do it. There was no risk whatsoever. Fast forward and now this is my job and I make a living doing it, and there's some risk and I have to make those choices. But whatever the coffee industry specifically, whoever is in that position to make a move, I think they have to ask themselves how they're balancing their desire for being passionate and caring about the thing that they're doing, being intentional, versus their need to make a certain amount of income, or their goal to create an opportunity for themselves and for others. I mean, it's really challenging to say this is what we should do. I think for the most part, and it's a cliche for a reason, but like being pragmatically intentional, saying, hey, this is the thing that really gets me excited, and this is the thing I want to do. How can I make this the thing that also supports me or me and my family, or is able to uplift the community that I'm in? And ultimately, it's going to probably be service based in some way, whether it's just roasting coffee for wholesale or running a cafe and communicating. So are you being honest with yourself? Are you willing to be of service all the time? And the younger version of me was in the service industry because it's what I understood and what I had learned, and it was a skill set I had no matter whatever I tried to do. But I was also in it because I could make more money there than I could, working at Old Navy or wherever, whatever other retail place. As I got older, I realized, maybe too late, I think, that the part of the job that was most valuable to me wasn't the cash in my pocket, the tips or the paycheck. It was the service part of the job. It was the realizing that people were going out of their way to come to the place that I was providing service. And I think even now that I don't do that day to day, I do try to do that with this show. I'm not just here to tell my own story, as much as I like to talk. My job is to provide a service to the people on the show by giving them a platform to share what they care about. And hopefully, as we go into 2025 and we expand the show into video with, and I'm going to shout it out so I don't forget, but Roastar Coffee Packaging, I'm wearing the hat today,
Nice.
have been incredibly supportive in enabling me to do this. Uh, we're able to share more and more stories and then take the show on the road and engage with people in person, and get out of this closet.
That would be awesome. I can't wait for that. That part, I think, is especially a great thing to just end here with, in that it's always good to reflect on what you hear. One of the things about podcasting is, and we try to tell it on the show, tell people on the show, like, think about this after you consume this podcast, reflect on the thing that made you go, oh, that's interesting. And don't lose it the way that you might lose that connection with a person that you were talking about. Like, don't take it for granted that you have a person there that is a part, of a complex web of relationships that you've got in the service industry. I think you've highlighted that throughout this conversation, and it's one of the great joys that sometimes is not tapped into as much. But I'm glad that you on your show are providing this platform for people to show that that is there, and that people can jump into it, contribute to it, and benefit from it. So Ryan, I really appreciate you being on the show, and I wish you all the more success. 300 some odd. You'll get the
Yeah,
exact number. That's a lot of episodes.
it's been quite a few hours. I'd like to just throw one last idea there that came as you were chatting, and there's a selfishness to offering service because I get so much out of it. It's unintentional selfishness, don't get me wrong, but by providing this platform here, or when I was serving people in the cafe or in the bar, I'm also getting a lot out of those engagements, and
Yeah.
even if it's only one engagement per day out of 100, it it still carries you through. And Kurt Vonnegut's one of my favorite authors, and but he's got a bunch of really boring, bad books that I have read. But the reason I keep exploring his work, even if it isn't the best book, for me, is there's always one sentence in every book that stops me, and I go, "Oh, I never would have thought of that organically on my own." And now that will impact the rest of my life because it'll be added to that perspective, that worldview that I see the world in. And as much as we are all lovely, unique, individuals, we're also a complete collection of all the thoughts and ideas and engagements that we've had with other people. And
Hmm.
so by continuing to do that, you're just continually expanding your worldview and making it, more dimensional, I think, more, you're looking out in all directions at once instead of just straight down the silo. But I think, my biggest flaw and my biggest strength, going back to that comment about being a creative raccoon, is that I don't just want to do one thing. I want to do all the things. And so when people ask me, what do you do? It's very hard for me to quantify that because I do this show and I'm a podcast host. That's one thing that I do. But I also produce it and schedule it and do all the other stuff. I also write books, fiction books occasionally, and I had a coloring book come out, and I'd sometimes consult for restaurants and other businesses or friends, and try to offer myself as that, sounding board as needed, just to do it because I like it. Uh, I'm always looking for the next opportunity to run or buy a coffee shop or a restaurant, and that's something that comes up pretty regularly. And I used to have a photography studio and used to do events and weddings, and it just all those things. And the problem with being, oh, I used to do design, so I do shirts and hats and that kind of stuff on the side too. And all of that stuff takes minutes every day.
Hmm.
And at some point, you end up being so busy. I end up being so busy doing different things that I I realize that I'm not spending enough time letting it all marinate so that the stuff that's coming out is the best thing. And I consider that a flaw because if I just focused on one or two things or three things, maybe they could be better or they could be more successful or they could get a wider audience. But I also consider it a strength because it allows me to relate to people in a lot of different positions, a lot of different, whatever they're doing. I've probably maybe touched on it somewhere, can at least relate to it. And it also turns me on to things I never would have thought I would have done. I'm doing video on our podcast. We're going video almost specifically because Roastar asked me to, and I went, "Oh, I don't want to do that." But this relationship is so valuable, and I appreciate the support you've been giving me. I'm going to figure it out. And now that I've started it, it's like a new exciting challenge, and I'm just so pumped about the stuff that I'm learning and like the new skills that I'm bringing on, and remembering that people are forgiving. People will understand if it's not perfect, and it'll get better and better and better.
Yeah.
And so I find it to be, someone recommended on my show this book by Seth Godin called The Dip, and it's a book about
Oh.
quitting, and knowing when to quit, because the only thing that really matters is to try to be the best in your whatever it is you're trying to do. If that's not your goal, then why are you doing it? But narrowing down, uh, the best can be the best in your field, in your neighborhood, in your specific niche, or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
and knowing what that is. And the reality is I don't know that I'll ever be the best in any of the things that I do, but I feel that my life is so much more valuable because I have this big, wide audience, big, wide experience. I have a younger brother, my youngest brother, I have two younger brothers, who he came out of high school, knew what he wanted to do, went to college, went to grad school, got a job, worked like a maniac, made a bunch of money, bought a high rise condo in Chicago, and like had this career. And I was, as the older brother, a total opposite. I took 5+ years to get through college, and didn't even choose a major until like my last semester. Came out, worked in sales, did real estate, got a design, went back to school, got a design degree, traveled all over the place. Fast forward 10 years, and he and I are talking, and I'm going, man, I really envy you. You seem to have all this figured out. Like, you knew what you wanted, you went for it, you got it, and you're stable. And here I am in entering my 30s, no real stability in my finances, not even sure what our next move is going to be. Have been through 3 or 4 careers. And I was looking at him like he had it all figured out. And he was looking back at me, and his response was, yeah, but I haven't done anything. I haven't gone anywhere. I haven't
Hmm.
traveled. I've been so focused on this one thing that I didn't get this wider experience. And I don't think either of the paths are right or wrong. I just think for me, I've realized that going wide is much more fun than and much more rewarding for me than just being the best or making the most money, or doing whatever. And
Yeah.
I'm grateful that I've had the opportunity to do so.
I would encourage people to, like you said, go to your website and check out all the stuff that is that wide career that you have, with One Wildlife being one of the things. And I think I kind of was expecting that answer from your brother. I was like, I'll bet this is where this is going, because
Yeah.
it is it's a classic thing, but it's Lucy pulling the football from Charlie Brown, where the message is you've got to hustle, you've got to be the best, you've got to grow. Don't even question it. You've just got to keep going. You can't even stop to enjoy it. Um, and I like that you brought this up, because you don't need as much as you think you might need, maybe because you are looking at too many different people and not yourself. Or, like, I like the idea of narrowing it down
Mm-hmm.
to your locality. And just think about the fact that a lot of these people who retire from Wall Street, they move upstate in New York to try to, like, make goat cheese or something. And, like, you could have just done that. You didn't need to.
Sure. I mean, if I list the things that I'm doing right now today, uh, we have 2.5 podcasts: Coffee People, Coffee Smarter, and Coffee With, which is a little bit smaller. Uh, which, going into video is a lot of learning and new stuff. Plus, we have all these new, great, amazing guests. I have 2 books that I'm working on currently, and a second coloring book. I am in process on a film script that we wrote that we're hoping to shoot in June, and working with a team of filmmakers on that. Uh, we're planning the summer coffee tour. I say we, but that's just it's just me. That's just something we always said in the restaurant. You always say we're
The
doing it.
royal we,
It's
yeah.
the we. And the coffee tour is my rebellion against social media marketing. Uh, I just decided that instead of taking a certain amount of money every month and investing in Instagram and, Facebook ads or whatever the new thing is. Um, I've heard TikTok is new. I'm not terribly familiar.
People seem to like
Um,
it.
yeah, I've heard good things. But instead of, say, spending a couple $100s a month doing that, I'm going to drive around the Pacific Northwest and take that money and buy coffee for people. It's just more fun and
That's
more
nice.
interesting. And I always find a lot more value in engaging with people, one on one. And you mentioned One Wildlife. That was a company I started in 2016. And I think one of the things that I really learned from that, besides not to have a 50-50 partnership with anyone, is uh, is that I'd rather have a smaller group of really engaged audience or supporters than a larger group of people who are only, ancillary
Yeah.
fans, who are seeing my thing and following it and just scrolling past. And I'd rather 1,000 engaged versus 10,000 that are, you know, kind of into it. Now, the 10,000 number looks good if you're trying to sell yourself to somebody else, but the return value won't be there in the long run. And so I think I've found that if I really focus on what what the value of this whole effort is, which is to engage with other human beings in some capacity that doesn't drive me crazy, uh, that'll ultimately be the thing that wins.
Really glad you shared all this. I think it's an entrepreneurial point of tension that it can free people up.
Sure. And I couldn't do it without, my wife, who's incredibly supportive and has health insurance. And I couldn't do it without, some of these incredible brands that have just supported me from the beginning with no expectations out of it, just because they appreciated that I was telling stories in this industry. Not, I wasn't telling them, I was just sharing them. And, I mentioned Roastar in part because it's a big deal for me. They're taking on a much more supportive role of this show, and part of that, without a lot of oversight, and
Yeah.
part of that is because even though I'm show them my numbers and here's who's listening and what it is, it's exactly that thing, is like, maybe it's not as big as some of the biggest podcasts on the internet, but the audience that's listening is engaged, and they're the right audience. They want to be involved and they care about entrepreneurship and being small businesses,
That's right.
and so you need those kind of outside supports to create something lasting. I think just in the sense that it gives me confidence, for me at least, and it gives me a window, or a runway to say I can keep doing this for so long, and as long as I keep caring about it and keep getting better and better, then it'll keep going.
Well said. Love that. Ryan, where can we go to interact with Coffee People podcast and you and what you do?
The internet. I'm sure you'll be sharing some links, but you can go to roastwestcoast.com is our newsletter. You can search for the Coffee People podcast on Spotify or Apple or wherever you're listening, if it's on another platform. And it's probably going to be there. I think it's listened to in like 90 countries now, so you can find it. Or just search, if you Google search for Ryan Woldt, you're going to find there's two of us. There's me and there's a scientist for 3M. I'm not the scientist one. I'm the other one.
Really interesting. Well, I'm sure that he does good with the name though.
Years ago we connected, and he sometimes gets people asking about things that I've done, and he just smiles and nods, and every now and again I'll get a message online from somebody asking me about some sort of adhesive for the backing for a glue project, and I just smile and nod and say, maybe go check out those guys.
Yeah. Let's get the other Ryan Woldt on the show, huh? Well, Ryan, again, thank you. It was great to talk with you. It was very enriching and rewarding to just kind of hear your heart for people, and I just appreciate your work. So thank you.
I appreciate you, Chris. When I started the show, there was only like 3 or 4 other coffee podcasts, and yours was one of them. And it really certainly shaped and influenced me as I've come along doing this process. So thank you for paving a path for the rest of us.
Okay, everybody. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that. I hope that it actually inspired you to maybe personally engage in more conversations. I think that's the best case scenario where you hear these episodes produced by Ryan, or you listen to this show talking to Ryan or other people and you hear their story. There's a wealth of stories that you can tap into across the counter. Maybe not for an hour over a cup of coffee, but at the very least, I think we can make our assumptions skew towards the positive, that there's always a depth yet unseen that can be tapped into with intentionality. Coffee is a great vehicle for helping that happen. We all are kind of engaged in that process by running coffee shops that produce a platform for people to get to know one another. And it is those strengthened relationships and depth of relationships that help us in society just continue to function and move forward. And so grateful for folks like Ryan doing the work that he does. So if you want to be connected to Ryan and learn more about what he has created and put his hand to in this world, then I definitely think that going to roastwestcoast.com is the best place to do that. It's kind of a springboard for everything else. But if you want the individual links for different places where you can find the books and other podcasts, I have a list of those links in the show notes for you to navigate as well. I want to say a big thank you to Ryan for joining us on the show. Really appreciate your story, your willingness to share and be vulnerable with us and open your life to the Keys to the Shop community. So thank you, Ryan. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback about today's episode, go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. And don't forget, keyholder coaching groups are coming up soon. If you want to join us and are interested in becoming a member of that, applications are open pretty soon. If not, by the time we put this episode out, they might already be open. But definitely email me and let me know you're interested. I'll send you the link to the applications. And again, depending on when we open things up, you actually might be able to see the link to that application here in the show notes. But if it's not there, reach out to me. I'm here to have conversations with you. We'll talk and we'll see how this might be able to work out for you. So again, thanks everybody so much. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.